오늘 정말 특별한 날입니다. 아톰 슈즈라고 불려지는 빅 레드 부츠, 나이키에게 고소를 당했던 사탄 슈즈, 소금 알갱이보다 작은 루이비통 백, 이 모든 화제의 제품을 만든 미스치프가 한국에 방문했습니다.
The core foundation of Mischief is just two principles. We are going to make anything that we want to make, and we are going to release it often.
It's okay to take risks with certain things. People generally just remember their favorite thing they've seen you do and the last thing they've seen you do.
This is the only life we know. It's a constant cycle of newness and reinvention.
I just have to ask you one question about the big red boot because people loved it. How do you come up with the idea? And
Talking about making shoes that don't look like shoes, obviously it's what Astro Boy wears on his feet, right? And sort of the conversation internally was like, why is this so compelling? And there's just some fun things to think about with that. It's like that shape, sure, these specifics are Astro Boy, but it's also kind of like Mario's boot. It's basically Dora the Explorer's boot. Like when you are working in video games or cartoons or so on, you need things that are recognized really, really fast because the frame rate is lower.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do is you have to boil something down to the sort of the minimum amount of information needed to have someone look at it and instantly say, boot. Right? And the big red boot is an attempt to basically like translate that into the real world. And it turns out that the thing that does that bears basically no resemblance to a real normal boot. It's like you strip all the detail out and then you amplify it. And you get this really, really compelling, just like big object.
Just in the fashion space, there were a lot of people making bigger and bigger shoes. And I think it did arrive right at the perfect moment. And I think part of that was the connection and nostalgia people had to this object. Even though they'd never seen it in physical space before. It is something that everybody knows and can immediately recognize, but it's never existed in physical space. It's only existed in the two-dimensional sketch of a shoe.
I mean, it's really absurd to see that in physical form. Like, you make every drops very individual and you always make a website for its own. Is this kind of a strategy?
I think this was born out of the idea that we can exist in any space. We don't actually have a logo. And I think having different websites lets us be very flexible with how we present everything.
We don't force ideas to fit our context. We like reconfigure our own context to serve the idea.
Yeah, that's
like Mischief shape shifts to push the idea forward.
Yeah.
It's like I heard that some famous sculptor says, I don't sculpt what I want, but I just found the shape of what's hidden in the stone.
Oh yeah, I think that was Kevin's quote.
Oh yeah, that was me.
That was
that was you?
Yeah, way back in the day.
Sometimes don't you feel tired or exhausted? Like every time there might be a pressure of we have to do new things. If you feel that, and how do you manage and refresh yourself?
Well, Kevin sleeps 10 hours a night. Except last night, which
But
is
not
why he's
last
kind
night.
of cranky right now.
To make new things all the time, there's a speed limit, I think.
Yeah.
And if you go past it, I think you can often start making bad work. And I think there have been a few times where we've pulled ourselves back from. I mean, there was a span of time, maybe 2 years, where we put out a project every 11 days, which was maybe too fast, and now it's a little less.
3
Every
days.
14 days.
But still, that does a lot. It does give a little bit more bandwidth.
Yeah. And there have been, one or two concrete points where we have actually all sat down and said, hey, we should adjust the schedule because, we sort of talked a lot about what it does for us. And then the trick is to keep an eye on if it ever starts hurting either us or the quality of the things we're putting out. It's important to remember that it is just a tool, right? We made it up. We're not obliged to always follow it, and we can amend it if necessary. But at the end of the day, when I think about the things that we have coming down the pipe, it's kind of impossible to get tired of them because they have nothing to do with each other.
Let's talk more about your team. In a normal company, there are business department, marketing department, and creative department, kind of that. But I guess Mischief has more fluidic structure, kind of that.
It's whatever we need to do to get it done, I don't think we ever, from the beginning, were like, okay, let's create these departments and hire for these departments. As we said earlier, everyone has a hand in some way in the creative process, even our lawyer, or even like manufacturing side or the customer service side. Like everyone can shape the ideas, which is really important. We kind of have like just the right amount of people to do almost anything. That's kind of the dream.
It's kind of a stereotype, but in art world, most artists are single individuals and they kind of dictate the project. But in your team, as Gabe said, like everyone participates in the process. At any point, don't you ever feel uncomfortable to gather everyone's opinions into one piece?
I think the individual genius artist as an idea is something that we're pushing against. Without everybody, we couldn't make everything. It would just not be possible. At the speed that we're doing and production level that we're working at, we really do need everybody to make everything.
Yeah. And the project is that Mischief, the entity, is the artist. We sign things that we make. We sign Mischief.
Not Kevin Weisner.
Exactly, yeah. Sometimes we sign Bingo Bob, but that's that's an inside joke.
I want to ask you about hiring process. How do people, new members, join to your team or group? What do you ask?
We're not like Google where we have like infamous interview questions like how many marbles are in this cup? Although maybe we should ask that. I don't know. But I think collectively we all have a pretty good gut sense of like who's going to push us further and contribute to making us better. And you can't really have like the same questions for every person. Everyone at Mischief is actually so different. And everyone has such a unique origin story too, right? Like maybe they were a friend of Kevin and Lucas from like back at school, or maybe we just met them on the street in New York. All of these have happened, by the way. But you're right, we do get a lot of random people saying, I want to work at Mischief, I want to work at Mischief. I think something to look for when people say that is, do you want to work at Mischief to escape something that you're unhappy in right now, or are you like running towards something that you're actually very excited about? That's like one thing I look for, because we'll talk to a lot of people who are at like a big company and they hate their jobs. And if you're running away from something, it's never going to work out. And then the other part that I like to look at is, have you shown a history of actually making things of your own volition with your own resources? I think that's like a very, very important skill.
From 0 to 1.
Yeah, totally.
We should cover some histories of Mischief. Your first drop came out in 2019, but I read that, Gabe, you started Mischief like in 2016?
Actually, I bought the first domain in 2012 or 13.
Mischief.com?
Yeah, in different spellings, but yes.
And how did you start the idea of Mischief?
I think like a better way to look at that is sort of Mischief is actually the culmination of a lot of like similar but different practices that all of us had over the years. All of us sort of had this background of taking like existing systems and structures and then turning them into tools to like do something else that people wouldn't really have seen coming. I was like making my stuff, they were making their stuff. Ended up meeting in 2017 or 2018.
Maybe that was late 2016, early 2017.
Yeah.
Acquaintances in common recommended that we should meet each other because like even from the outside we're saying, oh, you guys have a similar philosophy to like how and what you were making and how it lives. You should meet up.
When you guys first met, how do you feel? Or I mean,
I know when I saw their work for the first time, I felt like intrigued and a little bit threatened. Shit, like there's
look at these guys.
someone else.
Yeah, someone else.
I remember you said early on you thought we were a competitor.
Which was wildly untrue.
Yes.
The truth is, I think after meeting these guys, I realized my creative abilities had a ceiling. And so out of an act of survival, I had to become the business guy.
But like I feel like there are a lot of artists who I think are incredibly creative but don't have the structure to create the environment to make the work. To your credit, Gabe, I think you've really built that and preserved, like the creative environment to keep that structure going.
And built the power to execute it, right?
Yeah.
You guys are really good friends. He praised you.
I'll take it. They're both very good looking too. Okay, so the first meeting we had, it was in the old first Mischief space, which was basically the size of this table. And it was definitely like an illegal building. So if like someone lit a match, I think the whole thing would go up in flames. And we were actually sitting like this at the table.
Oh, really?
And Lucas was like very nice and just like nodding, and Kevin had like a burn on his hand, so he had his hand covered in goop or something, but he didn't explain to us what happened.
It was aloe, you burn your hand, you put aloe on it.
He was holding his hand like this the whole time.
Well, then you don't let it touch anything because then you get aloe all over everything. I thought it was a power play, sort of, to show up just like like, oh yeah, I was working. Like I was all burned up. But they had no idea what was going on. They just thought that I'd like dipped my hand in a tub of Vaseline or something and then showed up to the meeting.
Then before you guys meet each other, why do you want to make those things?
My answer is not going to be very satisfying. I just didn't like the other jobs.
Sounds like maybe you were running from
I
something.
was, and I'm a huge hypocrite, honestly. There's two feelings that I learned as soon as I sort of like entered the real world. One was that thrill from the act of creation. I guess I was like 22 or 23. I actually started teaching myself how to write code just because I was so bored with everything else. And I remember like making my first website. That act of making something from nothing was such a rush. I was like high. So that was like feeling number one. And then feeling number two was having that idea that you made from nothing actually have some sort of impact in the world. That was also like a really, really cool feeling. So really it was just like kind of chasing this feeling.
And do you remember the particular project?
Yeah, it was, so if you use like an iPhone and when someone's typing a message to you, you'll see the 3 dots animating that they're typing. So I made a GIF of that in 2013. And I think to my knowledge, it was the first time someone had done that. And then I put it on a website and said, if you download this GIF to your phone and if you send it to your friend with an iPhone, they're going to think you're typing forever. And they started sharing it. That was a crazy feeling. The thing is like the more you do this, as we've all like learned from like our own individual practices and as Mischief, you learn more about yourself, you learn more about the world, you learn more about like different spaces. So in a way, the more you do it, the more your world gets bigger and bigger. Or it's kind of like you wipe away the fog of war and see like more and more opportunities to do things. And it's a good feeling.
You've been hacking the internet or people's attention itself. I think many works of Mischief is related to internet technology. And when the technology advanced, will it affect your works? For example, the AI or kind of stuff?
I mean, I definitely think it'll be a good tool to use, and people will find very creative ways to play with it. If you're asking if we feel like any bit threatened by it, I just feel like it's just going to be another tool to mess around with.
We don't really get wrapped up in the hype or fervor around very novel new technologies or discoveries. They just sort of like add to the existing toolbox of things that we can do. It doesn't really change the nature of our work. Like we have like an emotional through line. People will always seek out these types of things. They will always react to these type of things. They will always share these types of things. The context changes a bit over time, but nothing really changes, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think there is a human element to everything that we're doing, and there is a point of view. And I think that's something that's hard to replicate. And it's hard to teach people. Like, I think there are a lot of people that sit down and they're like, oh, I'm making a Mischief idea, and it's not what we would do ever. And it's hard to sort of explain what that point of view is. Yeah.
This show's name is Think Experiment. Most of your works are like social experiments. You invited consumers into the game and they make their own strategies and play their own games. And it's all your game.
I think that's why generally the metaphor we reach for is sort of interactive performance art. And it is oftentimes, it's very much out of our hands how some of these things play out. And it is the audience, it is the interactions that they have that completes whatever that performance is.
I mean, I think the best art lives outside of art spaces.
It's always out of your control, like as soon as it gets put into the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's also just in terms of designing or coming up with projects to do more exciting for us when the moment it sort of reaches a escape velocity that we have no control over at a certain point. And
it's a very specific feeling that we're all very familiar with, where it's like, here we go.
The car is probably one of the best examples of that. You just have all these people who
5,000
share a key to the same vehicle, and they came together to find it, to fix it, to break it. Some people tried to steal it. Other people like broke down their garage door and stole it back. And it's really very, very difficult for us to predict. Is like, will the group of people find a way to start engaging with each other? That's super hard to predict. But when that happens, that's one of the coolest things.
I got the green spot. Do you have the red spot?
No, exactly. It's the expansion of the narrative.
Do you have any specific direction that what you want to be? For example, like you can say about the things that you will make. You can say about how you want to be memorized or recognized. Just feel free to speak.
I don't know. In my mind, like the most exciting thing has been just having the space to make these things. When we were in school, if you said, oh, you will have the time and space to actually produce all of these concepts, I'd be like, that's crazy. That's like the dream. To some of the questions that you've asked, there are hard financial things that we have to think about, and being able to preserve freedom of the projects, I think if we can do that and keep that going, I think that will be a major success.
I'd also say like the act of like our athletic output is also simultaneously an act of discovery, which kind of leads to an evolution that's coming, but we might not exactly know what it is. Trajectory from making the Jesus shoe to the Satan shoe to even like making more footwear was an unplanned path, but that was an evolution. You know, we put out probably 30 to 40 new outputs a year, and each of those are like discrete steps in an evolution to something that we can't quite define yet. Maybe that's part of the magic.
Yeah, it's kind of ecologic way. I mean, every drops are species.
Yeah. It's the random walk theory of product market fit.
Yeah.
Wow, this is actually very profound.
What about you, Kevin?
I don't know. I think that the best answer really is we will find out. There's so many individual things that we're still sort of chasing that it's easier to focus on than sort of what broader scale shift doing those things would represent.
You don't want to like assemble those.
Maybe they will assemble themselves. I think if there's one thing that we know for just how we operate, it's that trying to force it doesn't work.
Yeah. Maybe that's why you can go farther.
Maybe. I mean, it frees us up to experiment a lot. That in itself is quite unique, to be honest.
What would be the most miserable end of Mischief?
We've often thought of like what would be a great way to go out, and if we imagine we just have to go out, have to burn it all down, we just sell out all the like Viagra ads, just like every drop for the next 10 drops, just to bleed it out as another Viagra ad. You know? Like that would be a beautiful way to end things.
So that's not the miserable one, actually.
Yeah.
I think our hope is that if we ever start sliding to a miserable end, we'll light it all on fire.
Yeah. I don't think that miserable end will come to reality, but I mean, at least I can know that you guys won't go that way.
Client work.
That
would be the most miserable. Well, we wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah.
That would be,
Okay, I think we should end this conversation here. Yeah, we're running out of time, but to me personally, it's really a pleasure to have talk with you, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having us.
So thank you guys for coming, and hope you enjoy your days in Korea. Thank you.
all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.